Guys, oh my goodness. Wow. 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 Okay. Let's see how everybody let's let's see what's going on here. Oh goodness. Oh. Oh my Lanta. Um let's see. Oh, it's me. Hi, baby seal. Did I scare you? I'm sorry. I'm sorry I scared you. Let me turn it down a little. How's that? Let's turn it down. And if you guys turn the volume down and now I'm quiet, turn it back up. Anyways, hi. Who's this person? Nobody. They're gone. Goodbye. Bye. Goodbye, everybody. Hi. Hi, gamers. Okay. Listen. We were gonna have a show, you know how things happen, and then all of a sudden you have to do other stuff. Well, that's what's going on here. We're in that gotta do other stuff category, and that's fine. That happens. Things happen. Um, there was a variety of issues. One of them is that in the United Kingdom, which is it's a place across the Atlantic Ocean or across the Pacific Ocean and an entire set of continents, depending on your perspective. There's a heat wave, and as such, some of our UK folks can't do it. And now, I know it's like, oh man, in some places of the world, the UK, is a part of the world. In some places in the world, 35 degrees Celsius is not that unlivable. Everybody has air conditioning units and they're acclimated. And it's dry, but in the UK, those kind of temperatures, especially at night, it's actually kind of like a crisis. And it's not like a representation of the softness of the UK people at all. To be very clear, officially, that is not a representation of that. It's serious and it sucks and it's super uncomfortable. I hope everybody's okay over there. It's weird how the climate is getting different. If only there was a video game made in 1997 that was remade in 2020 that had us examine our treatment of the planet that we're on and how the things we do might affect things like climate. If only. If only. If only. So yeah, we're gonna call it. I would like to get all of the guests on that. And schedules are hard. When you have multiple content creators with their own content schedules, it's hard to get everybody lined up, and so it's unclear the way in which we will get those guests. But they're some of my favorite content creators, and I hope that we can get them going. Either together or separate or in other groups, other configurations of groups. I've had a ton of people hit me up to be a part of this. And there's a couple people that there's some old guests of the show that I really want to get back on. I really want Philip Hartshorn on. I really want Ray Kaufman on. and we'll be reaching out to them soon, or I have reached out to them. Philip was recently honored with getting to be the curator for the Carnegie Hall Distant Worlds, which is such a cool thing. And I'm fully aware, by the way, that this chat border is an atrocity and it doesn't match anything. But needless to say, I didn't have this layout as part of my... We're going to do this layout together right now, and then I'm going to start talking, while people get in here, I'm going to start talking about Final Fantasy VII Revelation. Anyways, look. It's always like this. There's this cycle of... there's this dev cycle, like where something comes out, there's a news, interviews, and it sets all of the little pre-established factions in the fandom ablaze. They create like the I call it like kind of the Kindle for discourse. It's not the fire itself. The discourse is usually the fire, and the discourse is usually generated by the thing itself. But there's all these little, elements that come together. And then, obviously, there's always, anytime anything positive comes out about the remake trilogy whatsoever, be it more news, be it somebody that's really excited about it that gets millions of views, there's going to be pushback from people that weren't happy with it, and some of that's grift, some of that is like just opportunistic rage bait. Some of that is all that, but there's also just, a lot of people that, when they see somebody enjoying something they hate, it reminds them of the displeasure they had, around the thing. And I think there's a degree of humanity to that. And I don't want to fully discount, people that don't like a thing. I do think there's more constructive ways to cope with not liking art than making not liking it your whole personality. But I'm glad that we have the freedom to do that. We also have the freedom to call that out, recognize it as, not constructive to the art space, and also sort of see the context. And so we'll kind of go over some of that today, and because there's been some virality around the conversation again, and that's always what happens. Is there's been a little bit of a slowing of articles after the Revelation trailer, and so people are now back to trying to fill the space created by news with discourse, or feeling validated in the way that they feel, etc. What percentage would you say think loves, likes the games versus dislikes the game, hates the game? I would say it's still an extreme minority that's negative towards it. Mog the Moogle, thank you for the super chat. Due to the time differences. And I see that you are in... I'm making an assumption based on the currency you're using, that you're in the heat zone right now. How is it there? How is the summer? Also, I saw Old Man Sakaki in there. How are you? Is it warm? Sick text box border. Thanks. Big Pig Venus 6969. I love your name. Underappreciated name. I've appreciated it every time I've seen it sometimes vocally. Philip is so cool, Mr. Soy. Yeah, and welcome in, Miss Moon. Miss Bumblebee. 97 Fahrenheit? Wow. That's a lot. That name is a risky read. I know. I know. But I tackled it. I handled it. I handled every inch of that name. Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Give me a second here. I'm looking through stuff. Oh, I see now. Yeah, you said earlier in chat you live in brick houses. Yeah, I mean the brick houses don't help. Not having AC doesn't help. And you've lived in California desert, Houston, Texas, and West Virginia. 97 Fahrenheit without AC is awful. It is. It's like 70. Yeah, it's about 70 in most of coastal California right now. Um, yeah, I mean, which is why, which is like rent is like 3 times the cost of one of those new Steam cubes. Greetings from Scotland. Tyler, welcome in. I love this art, by the way. And I had it set in a way where it was much better displayed, but now, and so I'm going to use the same art here. I'm going to, look, you don't need to even see me. I'm there. Look, God, Tyler, look at that shit. I mean, there's just nobody does it like Tyler. TYLOR HEPNER. So, but that was much more on display on my original layout. But I put this layout together about 1 minute before going live because we did have stuff. You think Max and Hamaguchi should stop talking? Hamaguchi wants to bring diversity to the game. Max always criticizes the game because of the criticism he receives. Enough of all this. DCX Victor. Are you the same Victor from? Are you from like? If I recall correctly, are you were visiting Thailand? Are you that Victor? Yeah, it's gonna be a lot more me talking to you guys than me talking to guests. You guys are my guests today. This is SEAL Team 7 audience, by the way. Okay, so are we, I think Max is trying to prove he's not uncritically positive. Yeah, Max has said literally nothing wrong here, and I don't always agree with everything that Max says all the time. You know, and he doesn't agree with everything I say all the time. That's not a big deal. Like this is video games. It's not that big of a deal. Uh, as far as uh, why is why did Max give Rebirth a 10 out of 10? Like, is that disingenuous? No, please, can we not collectively forget that Rebirth was one of the highest rated games on Metacritic, both user and reviewers. Like we're in this weird space where like nitpicked version, like caricaturized criticisms of the game have made it seem like like most of the game wasn't like mind-bogglingly awesome. Like I recall, and I keep saying this, like I remember when Remake came out and Hamaguchi made a statement like a year after, like in 2021, saying that, as far as the next chapter goes, we've been looking to things like, Horizon Forbidden or Horizon Zero Dawn as like inspiration. And everybody was like, whatever, dude, no way. There's no way you make a game as ambitious as Horizon, as an open world game. Like, it's not going to be open. Well, you can't do that. It's going to be more corridor, hallway simulator stuff. There's no way. And like in an incredibly short amount of time, Rebirth came out and it had built on the flawless combat of Remake, added more complexity and fun to it, built an engaging and alive Gaia that we were allowed to fall in love with, and still somehow navigated through the linear elements of that story in a way no other open world game has. It is who really likes Rebirth like more than consumers? Game makers. All the game makers were like, this is fucking crazy, man. And you think, oh, paid reviewers and shills. One, no. Two, a lot of people with context on game development could see what this game was in comparison to other things. Did everything hit? Of course not. Thank you, Jano. Love your subscription. Of course not. Does that mean like it doesn't deserve a 10/10? Well, okay. So let's talk about review scores. If you're gonna, like, for me personally, there are games that have less flaws than Remake that came out in the same year that I liked less. Right? They had less flaws. So if you're reviewing something, if you're reviewing a piece of art the same way you grade a paper, I think that's a failure of art review. That's not how it works. Something can be a 10/10 experience to you with flaws because, and if you have to frame it as some kind of, like credit algorithm, you could do so with, I don't know, extra credit and say that Rebirth got extra credit for its tenacity and what it was willing to do and its ability to still maintain bold storytelling with an open world system. Some of the pacing, like, I would say that one of the things that's really good about Rebirth from a storytelling perspective is that no matter how you play it, the pacing is still really good. Okay. You could say, oh, well, if I get distracted with like 20 hours of side quests and then I have to go back to the story, that affects the pacing. Of course it does, but it does with all games of its type. And it does so better in Rebirth than it does a lot of those other game types. I'm going to even throw Horizon as an example where it's like, dude, I completely have no idea why I'm at this town. I've been lost doing whatever. Rebirth is actually better at funneling you towards progressing the story. Okay. So I think it does a lot of that stuff really well. Also has the best combat. Its combat is so good. How about this? Its combat is a 12 out of 10. So there you go. Like you can do that kind of arbitrary number assignment stuff. But like saying, oh, you gave it a 10 out of 10, but you find faults with it, that doesn't make any sense. Is is a bad faith argument that reduces art criticism to something that you would find in you know, in a math exam, and that's not what art review is. So, you know, there's a bunch of bad faith stuff like that happening. As far as is Hamaguchi talking too much, um, you know, like I hear that complaint, but we still don't know hardly anything about how this game is actually gonna fucking work. And I'll tell you and we'll go over the dev quote in specific that said that made people say, "Oh man, you're talking too much." And it's the one we actually read live on our show last week, because it had been previously published, but I didn't see it, or most of us didn't see it, because it started to really gain traction that day. And you know, that quote in particular, a lot of people were like, "Oh, they're talking too much. They're spoiling too much. They're spoiling the game at this point." And there's a few other things they're spoiling the game at this point. And I implore any of the people that are super convinced that the game is spoiled to tell me how it's all gonna you know, unfold. It isn't. We're talking like these are broad existential story beats, you know, that are being disclosed here, and a lot of us want to know what kind of buy-in we should have, you know. So that's the way this is going to be. Nihilize, welcome in. You know, there's no such thing as a flawless game. I agree, and you know what? The OG had flaws. You can't tell me that the OG didn't have bizarre pacing issues, stuff that stretched plausibility to an extreme degree, you know, even plausibility issues that Rebirth solved. Like, how the fuck does Aerith get up to the northern capital when you have to like steal a plane that crashes, which is apparently the only boat? You know, like there's just so many dumb things like that are just that we take at face value because they have ludonarrative dissonance. But if you were to try to apply that to, if you were to try and release that, let's say today, we wouldn't accept it. Like we wouldn't. We'd be like, that's dumb, you know. Um, and no, the OG is perfect. You know, again, the OG is a 10 out of 10. You know, um, you were worried about the snub. Yeah. I mean, the snub was annoying for game of the year, but I kind of understand it. Also, you know, like there's just recency bias, and that's something that we're going to have to deal with again, you know. Um People that say Hamaguchi is talking too much don't know what it felt like when Square was showing trailers behind closed doors. Oh my god, dude. Do you remember that? Oh yeah, they showed a trailer behind closed doors at the Tokyo Game Show. It was like, what the fuck, man? Yeah, I remember that. That's not the way. That's not the way either. Yeah. As far as Hamaguchi wanting diversity, bothering people. I mean, like, look, just yeah, and we'll read that article too. We'll read that article. But in the interim, how's everybody doing? How are you? You're just tired of Nomura-esque storytelling? You know what's funny? And I hear you saying that, and that's a valid thing. Um, you know, uh, you can be tired of that, but I have noticed that the culture has really shifted. Okay, I mean this. Like 3 years ago, it was such fair game to just take pot shots at Nomura and talk about belts and Cage 3 Remind story shenanigans. Um, but this year, people are starving for it. Like they are desperate for like whatever goofy stuff he comes up with, because at very least he is super inspired. Like you can never say that Nomura isn't creative. Like the scraps we got for KH4 have people on the street talking about it. Like, it's wild. Like, you know, the Nomura hate was forced to. Yeah, the Nomura stuff was always misrepresentative too. They just wanted a punching bag. Yeah, absolutely. And you always find out about that. And you know, there are things that made that like really part of like the conversation. Like Donkey had videos where he would talk about Nomura. Then he would just, because he didn't care, like he just wanted to put a face to the name. Oh, these are Nomura-isms, or you know, stuff like that. And you know, he rarely has a ton to do with um granular story points. He's usually more, you know, like big picture stuff, and then he hires people to make the other stuff work, you know. Yeah. And Nomura is a fantastic artist. Every time he comes out and just draws something, you're like, oh man, he's got that sauce. You know, he's a generational artist, and he's only improved as an artist, you know. People forget Nomura had a huge part in the OG story. Give the guy some credit. Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of times people, and then you know, Nomura has been a source of preservation with a lot of things in Final Fantasy VII Remake project, but he was blamed for any of the diversions, and and you know, like it's also just fun to reduce things, right? And so you'll hear things. It's fun, you know, like we're you know, not the most sophisticated, you know, thinkers all the time. And it's fun to say, you know, like run with jokes like plot ghosts and time janitors and stuff like that. And say, oh, yeah, you know, this is funny. This is good. And then it kind of seeps its way into the conversation and the milieu of everything, but it's not an actual criticism. It's just a reduction of a thing, right? And there are, you know, there's obviously good faith criticisms about the story involving, you know, whenever you breach, you know, the seals of a story and use some kind of metaphysical lens, you know, and then you show the audience that lens, um, you better know what you're doing, and you better have a payoff for that. Because if you don't, you know, the audience is going to feel really silly. You know, they're going to feel like, if you're going to take me out of the story somehow, um, it better be to show me either a new story or something about this story that I needed to see more of, right? We talking about verses? Yeah, basically. Yeah. We're talking about Nomura right now. Actually, and how the world needs Nomura. The world needs the world needs verses 13 more than ever. Like, and if you look at the interest in for Kingdom Hearts right now, it's super high. Like, and I think this is always a good indicator for me is when I hear about it outside of the internet and my circle. And outside is where I heard, I was like, oh man, I'm so excited for Kingdom Hearts 4. And I've heard that several times. I've heard people go like, oh, does this mean that there's going to be a Kingdom Hearts Magic the Gathering thing? Like, I swear to God, I heard that. And people were genuinely excited about that. People were like, man, I hate this Marvel Magic the Gathering collaboration. I need Kingdom Hearts. And then I don't have the I don't have the heart to tell them that Marvel has probably infiltrated Kingdom Hearts as well. Um because Disney owns everything. Um but I don't think we're going to get a Kingdom Hearts version of Marvel Magic the Gathering crossover. That would be too many layers, right? Although when there has been there has been like Nomura styled Marvel stuff that's been really, really good looking. I just can't get excited about a new Kingdom Hearts anymore. Maybe when it's out, I can muster some. What's crazy is like I didn't expect to be excited either. And if I'm going to be objective about the trailer, I don't know. I was like, it took me a couple of watch throughs and like brushing up on lore to even know what I was looking at. And other than that, it was like very little new anything. But I was still so excited about it. And everybody I've talked to was like, oh man, I can't I can't wait for Kingdom Hearts 4. Did you see the trailer? I had no idea what was going on in it. Like nobody I've met on the outside has any idea who any of those people were other than Sora. They some of them thought that the guy with the mask was Yuzora, who it's not. That's it. Right? And they don't look cuz they don't have time. Cuz they're in debt and they have to work hard to pay for Magic the Gathering because it's incredibly expensive hobby. I'd rather think of it as a sequel so that I can accept the story diversion. A lot of people, that's a great thing too. So anytime anything ever comes up anymore, it's all about, is this a sequel or a remake or both? And yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to the quotes. And I think we can actually probably jump into quotes now. Let me pull some up. Let me get my quote repository open. And then I'll share it here. Hold on. I'm going to sneeze. Ooh boy. Strelitzia, yeah. H fans do not understand that there's casual audiences consuming this stuff. Yeah, I mean, but there are, like, they're the main consumers. Actually, you know what? They're the casual fans are the main consumers of everything, you know, and that includes the stuff we talk about too, you know, not just Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy VII. Hello, everybody. Having it be a sequel means it doesn't replace the original Materia Hunter. Yeah. Darth Vader going to sell. Yeah. I mean, Star Wars, you know, like I don't know how much of Disney is going to interlace with Kingdom Hearts, and that's the big question. Uh, but it seems Star Wars is probably a given based on like that one AT-AT foot. Although I've had people tell me that that's not true, and I don't know. But it'd probably be best if there was just one, you know. Do you think they anticipated the sequel theories? Yeah. I think that's something too, is that it's very clear that they are aware of discourse. I feel pretty confident about that at this point. And I think, Hamaguchi wandering into Max's room is an indicator that he's aware of fan discourse. And every question that he's asking, everything he is or answering, everything that he's saying fully aware that it will generate and encourage discourse, because that is something that keeps a game alive, is discourse. And the at this point it's pretty for sure that really, for real, in November of this year, for serious this time, Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to come out. And having discourse alive for any other game, while a challenge, is going to be important. Because here's the deal with gaming, right? Did I tell you my Hamaguchi watch story? No. Hi, Susie. Also, I mean, you told me you saw Hamaguchi, and I know you have a love of watches. I can't wait to hear your Hamaguchi watch story. Anyways, yeah, Hamaguchi could be in here, chat. No, he's watched. Hamaguchi is a mutual. Hamaguchi follows me. Hamaguchi has made commentary on things that I've done, right? So he literally pays attention, right? It was just about your watch, your watches. It was just watch talk. Watch talk with Hamaguchi. I think that you need to publish that. That could be Max's next video. Hamaguchi watch talk with Susie. Gosh, oh golly gee, boys. Okay. Um so oh man. Well, what if I don't want to allow ads on your site, thegamer.com? Okay, I have to. Sorry. All right. Okay. So right off the bat, we're just gonna start with um with a controversial article, because why not? Uh, because welcome to my channel, right? Uh, and I also just think this is something that a lot of other content creators just avoid, and I don't, and I feel like I can handle what's going to come up, but and I'm not being critical of people that avoid this. Okay? I'm just telling you I don't. And so we're going to start with the following article. And okay. Naoki Hamaguchi opens up about the queerness, diversity, and hidden details of Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy. Okay? And oh look. See, I'm so glad that I turned off ads for the site, cuz look who it is. If it isn't our own TYLOR HEPNER's art being sold. You get money for that, right, Tyler? You better. Okay, anyways. Also, look at this picture. Dude, we've got Vincent being a representative, which I mean that's fine. Good for him. I does yeah, I feels like I could have chosen a couple other ones, but hold on just a sec. Okay. Hold on just a sec. Slumbering for eternity yet still woke. Yeah, I mean, sure. Okay, so let's read the article. Final Fantasy VII takes place in an utterly fantastical world filled with monsters, magic, and all sorts of mythical things. But ever since the 1997 original, it has always sought to feel real and grounded in the context of its bold narrative. Just like our own world, most normal people are simply trying to make ends meet while greedy corporations suck life from our planet with an unrelenting thirst for dominance. Square Enix always intends for this to be a deliberate political reflection on how unchecked powers would sacrifice millions of lives and let our planet burn if it meant infinite profits. And now, more relevant than ever, the Remake trilogy places this part of the narrative at the forefront. It also seeks to depict people, relationships, and everyday life in a more honest and realistic way. To mark the recent launch of Rebirth on Nintendo Switch and Xbox consoles alongside the reveal of FF7 Revelation, I caught up with Naoki Hamaguchi to dig deeper into the diversity, Easter eggs, and fan service of this ambitious RPG experience. An element of FF7 Rebirth that I come back to during every playthrough is the same-sex couple who travels across the world, much like Cloud and company do. It begins with an aggressive slap fight on the streets of Calm before evolving into a sapphic relationship as the two women leave the men in their lives behind before falling into the arms of each other. Neither of these characters have names, but watching their romance develop over the course of my own adventure was an unexpected delight. This is true. It's funny. And when I asked Hamaguchi about this specific part of the game, he was equally surprised and thrilled to hear about the reception it had among players. He said, "To us, what matters most is the feeling of a diverse group of people inhabiting this world in an authentic manner. Rebirth is a game where you encounter many towns, cultures, and relationships throughout your journey. In my view, the presence of diverse, authentic relationships within that journey also enhances the world's realism." Okay? As such, it feels closer to say that even for these two characters, our goal wasn't to add same-sex couple just for the sake of adding it, but to portray the stories of those inhabiting this world with sincerity and care. In truth, it made us incredibly happy as the development team to see players paying close attention even to these subtle interactions and shifts in relationships. We've seen more games move in this inclusive direction, and so I ask if Hamaguchi believes that LGBTQ plus representation in Japanese video games in particular has become more authentic in past years, using Rebirth's brief yet welcome character moments as the small examples. Rebirth is a game where you encounter many towns, cultures. I know this is weird, but I think it's actually a different quote. Okay. Rebirth is a game where you encounter many towns, cultures, and relationships over your journey. This is why I believe the atmosphere of the world, where such individuals simply exist and go about their lives, ultimately enhances its realism. In truth, my impression is that players also pay close attention to not only whether these depictions are there, but also their detailed nuances, like the emotional distance and conversational tone between characters. Hamaguchi continues, especially following the shift to an open world, we were keen on conveying the sense that a truly diverse group of people inhabit this world, through the town's details and mundane dialogue that unfolds outside this main story. As such, it feels closer to say the presence of these relationships didn't feel like a distinct depiction for us, but rather a result of building FF7's world in an authentic way. But it also wants to delight and surprise in equal measure. While they represent a very different sort of realism, the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy allowed Hamaguchi and his team to fill the world with subtle details and Easter eggs that aren't just easy opportunities for fan service, but make the world feel more alive. I asked how the developers decide what things should be included and how tasteful it needs to be for fans to appreciate them. He said FF7 series truly has a long history, including not only the original game, but the various spin-offs. Within those are fans who feel attachment towards different entries. For some, Crisis Core is special. For others, Advent Children was memorable. There are even those who've never forgotten small moments from the original game. Hamaguchi explains. Because of this, whenever we make Easter eggs or small details, there's an abundance of options for which memory from which game might delight players. I view this as one of the unique strengths of the series. What's also interesting is how many members of the current development team are quite simply fans of FF7 themselves. Someone will definitely notice this, or I want to include this Easter egg, are truly routine conversations. That being said, Hamaguchi also notes that he doesn't want this to stuff the trilogy with oodles of hidden details or deep cut Easter eggs purely for the sake of it. Instead, be incorporated as part of each game's overall world building. There are familiar characters, imagery, and even sounds that diehard players will recognize and cling to. So making sure all these are positioned, it's okay, Charlie, are in the right place is paramount. I bring up a few specific examples, namely posters that depict the weapon set to feature heavily in Final Fantasy VII Revelation, and NPCs paying homage to Tifa and Scarlet's now infamous slap fight, which Hamaguchi confirmed will be coming in the third game. This remake series was designed to be a single, cohesive work spanning the overall trilogy from the outset. So we've put considerable and detailed thought into how much to show right now versus what we shouldn't show just yet. In particular, I believe the more players familiar with the original game, the more likely they'll infer the future based on small details. That's why in Rebirth, we intentionally left room for people to speculate. Does this maybe mean, ? And then no, it was also confirmed to us that outfits from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth should be making a return in Revelation, while many additional costumes will also be made available. But you won't be able to express your eccentric fashion during key story moments. Hamaguchi is right on the money, especially with a trilogy that has gone out of its way to subvert expectations and play around with the original narrative. Regardless of how small the details might be, players are going to read into them and will likely expect them to pay off in a small or massive ways. In the case of the slap fight and the weapons, however, these are both going to play a significant role in Revelation. The weapon poster is one such example of this. From the early stage of development, our aim regarding weapons was to leave a lingering presence of earth-shattering entities within the world itself. That said, we didn't want to be straightforward, ominous, or foreshadowing either. If anything, because this was a world that lost reverence towards the planet, images of once feared entities are instead consumed as pop culture motifs. We wanted to capture that subtle air of irony. Charlie, what is it that you need? I know that you want attention, but you also want food? Is it just attention? It's just attention. Okay. You're in the right place. Okay. On the other hand, I'm sure the interaction between Tifa and Kyle, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah. I already said that. Did I? Oh, no. I didn't. On the other hand, I'm sure the interaction between Tifa and Scarlet likely made those familiar with the original game think this is definitely leading up to that moment. Of course, that showdown is depicted with the care it deserves in the third installment. We hope you look forward to seeing how these elements scattered as homages will ultimately tie into one another. I also had to ask whether the scene in which Elena from the Turks indulges in a sea salt ice cream was a deliberate reference to Kingdom Hearts. Bad news, it isn't. Okay. It might be disappointing to hear this, but Elena's ice cream isn't a homage to Kingdom Hearts. Hamaguchi laughs. In Japan, there's a very popular soda-flavored popsicle called Garigari-kun, which we've actually referenced quite a bit during development. As such, it's closer to say we were envisioning a slightly nostalgic popsicle reminiscent of the summer. How much content is too much content in Final Fantasy VII? Okay, one of the common criticisms levied towards FF7 Rebirth was how much content it had to offer. Don't get me wrong, most of its minigames were terrific, fun, and its open world regions weren't as vast and empty as the worst AAA culprits. But I wouldn't blame anyone for skipping over certain distractions because they simply didn't have time. Turns out this was actually a part of the overall design philosophy, became a consistent conversation across the team throughout development. Many felt this feeling of utter abundance was part of what made the original Final Fantasy VII so special. It might have ended up backfiring a little bit, though. And I totally get that, by the way. That it was something that felt kind of I think in a way that none of the previous Final Fantasies had done. The getting out of Midgar and getting to the world map in FF7, the OG, was a unique sense of freedom. Even though it was really just corridors again, you know, it felt like big corridors. And even though there'd been world maps in many JRPGs up to this point, just like the transition from the first few hours in this one giant city and then going to that, like the tone shift was so different, and so I do actually think Rebirth did appropriately match that tone shift and scale at the same level that Remake captured the scale and tone shift with Midgar. And so for FF7 Rebirth, we were particularly keen on not following the main story, but also creating a sensation of inhabiting this world. For example, you might set out to advance the main story, but end up playing several rounds of Queen's Blood, dressing up your chocobos, or exploring the world map instead. I consider this to be quintessential FF7 experience, including the sensation of getting sidetracked by the journeys itself. In truth, though, that overwhelming feeling was felt by the development team, not just players, especially with the shift to an open world. An exorbitant number of elements were developed simultaneously, such as minigames, side quests, Easter eggs, exploration, and dialogue events. Truthfully, I'm sure many staff members felt worried during the early development stages, wondering, would we really be able to finish all of this? That's why I made it a point to solidify the overall game design very early in development. Where and when to place each minigame, where to leave room for side content pacing, and where to include Easter eggs. This gameplay blueprint was something we laid out very clearly from the onset. When I asked if there are any hidden secrets or Easter eggs that players seemingly haven't discussed on social media yet, Hamaguchi mentions the Komainu statues, the lion dog statues at the Gilgamesh Island entrance, and how they're actually modeled after Enkidu, canine companion of Gilgamesh, who appears in many other Final Fantasy titles. Damn. I don't actually think I've heard that either. Wow. Okay. When all these Yeah, because Enkidu, by the way, in like the Epic of Gilgamesh, is a very important character. And I know that in most of the FFs, he's reduced to his dog companion. And that's fine. Okay. When all these elements are brought together, whether it be the diversity, realism of its imaginary world, or the frequency of Easter eggs and hidden discoveries, Hamaguchi is hopeful that once we reach the end of Final Fantasy VII Revelation, it will feel like we've also concluded a pilgrimage that has been decades in the making. By having the complete picture, the team was able to share the sense that this game will come together if we build things up until this point. As such, it feels closer to say that this isn't a game that simply features a large amount of content, but rather one where we challenged ourselves with how to turn this massive scale of a gameplay into a single cohesive journey. Okay. So, and I'm sure there's going to be more articles from the gamer, talking about this. You know, obviously this used to be something that it's only been recent that there's been this like really strong um, mobilization of people that uh, like will parade your content and yell at you for even like just basically suggesting that it's totally fine for a game developer when trying to build a realistic world to build a world realistically. Like punish them because they are uncomfortable with the fact that people's behavior that does not affect them at all exist. Um, and but I like that Hamaguchi is just like, you know what? I don't care. We did this. We wanted this. We're building, like, we want you to connect with this world like you connect uh, with your world. And why is that? And it's because the story that they're telling is supposed to have value in getting us to examine our own world. That's always been Final Fantasy VII. That was Final Fantasy VII in 1997. That's Final Fantasy VII in 2027. There is no lack of consistency there, right? That's what this that's one of the things that set this game, uh, you know, miles apart. It's something that allowed Final Fantasy as like a concept to really materialize into something um, that that a huge audience connected with. And yeah, there were other things that made Final Fantasy VII stand out to people. It was the first AAA game. Really, it really was. It was the first game where you're really seeing a ton of ads. Like the jump from 6 to 7 graphically was so impressive, and a lot of people were really impressed with that. The world, it was the first time that like a world that was built in a Final Fantasy game was so closely representative of our own. You know, um, Midgar is based on New York. And then you see all of these elements of, like North America built in, and then
True beauty is an expression of the
Damocles with a party of 8. Thank you for the raid. Appreciate it. I like the music, and so all of that stuff, all of what made Final Fantasy VII what it is, is if you're going to pay tribute to what that is, you're going to have to include this messaging. And if you're going to really show it service, like the message of Final Fantasy VII, you're going to update that messaging to 2027 standards. And they absolutely have. They absolutely have. Every member of the staff has. Toriyama wrote Stand Up, which is the song in the Honeybee Inn. That was Toriyama's own lyrics. He was very instrumental in that whole sequence in Remake, and which is largely about accepting yourself as who you are. Allowing space, for that. And as far as themes and messaging, Nojima has built this world that's got even more layers that more explicitly show, like the downfall of the Republic of Junon. The Republic of Junon wasn't even a thing in the OG. That is new lore, right? Junon was in the OG, but we didn't know that it was part of a republic that spanned 2 continents that ultimately fell as a result of a large corporation's rise to power. You could vaguely infer that, but that lore has been cooking for a while. It started in the novels, and it's come to fruition in this world. And that messaging is incredibly political, inescapably so, and incredibly consistent with what most people's interpretations of the OG was, which is that sort of a that there is messaging surrounding what late stage capitalism will do to a free nation, to a republic, and instead of leaning away from that, they added more nuance, they added more labels to make it clear that that's what's happening here. Does it mean that the discussion will like ultimately like write in big giant letters capitalism bad in part 3? Obviously not. And that isn't the way FF7 worked either. It trusts you to draw your own conclusions by accurately presenting all the information to you in this form that you're more interested in because you're because the art of it has connected you to it, you know. So, okay. I've just been kind of on a rant, um and I haven't really looked at chat much. Let me do that. Oh man, there's been a lot. There's been a lot of chat, guys, on both sides. Yeah, this graphic is nuts. No one, now one dumb side of the internet criticized the game for having gay characters back then. Another one made a huge deal for FF16 not having racial diversity. Yeah. Data centers are literally Mako reactors, by the way. I know. Okay, there's good stuff for me to refer to here, but I'm gonna feed Charles and be right back. Hi, Charlie. You hungies?
Da, 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 da.
Oh boy. Yeah, it's a good picture. A great one, in fact. Okay, let's get back here. Did we ever get a comment back from Victor? Victor gone? I remember Victor. Victor was fun. Also, look, I mean, it's kind of like the ship has sailed, but I always find it funny when people like Chia Dev, have you seen confirmation of Aerith's death in Rebirth on the official SC Press website? Oh, hi, Steed. Um, I mean, kinda. Like I've seen the press website, and I I mean, I don't think, yeah, I wouldn't call that like a confirmation of anything other than that, like to, I mean, from the perspective of everybody that I think watched the game or played the game, we know that most of the party and most of reality viewed her dying. Um, does that mean she has an additional status of alive somewhere else? You know, in some other plane of existence, in some other live stream world or whatever. Um, you know, that can also be true. So while that's like, I just don't see that as a gotcha for anybody's theories or confirmation or anything like that. I think it's just like, yeah, that a Aerith died, but we know that in OG and in Rebirth at least two Aeriths die. I mean, I don't know about that. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that Aerith didn't die. I'm just saying that like I don't consider that to be interesting information or worthy to like enter the theory conversation. Like that's the takeaway everybody's supposed to have, right? Is that, you know, at least in some capacity, you know, a good portion of the party, including, and if we're to, you know, assume that the part of the story that we're starting in will largely not have POV Cloud, you know, from the POV of Tifa at least, and we are very confident that they are going to see Aerith as dead. Yeah. It's not more of a confirmation than the game itself. And yeah, in some way, shape, or form, I don't think anybody thinks, oh, Aerith 100% survived that. Like there is a dead Aerith, you know. Um they say in the main timeline she's dead. They don't even confirm the existence of timelines in the official press thing, right? So look, I'm gonna be honest. I know the guy that writes the press stuff. He's just doing his best. Okay, like, and it's hard to like encapsulate all of the terminally on line discourse for this stuff, you know, and be responsible, like as if some guy is responsible for the messaging of like, you know, like I think just in general, I'm not saying that devs are unreliable, but like we're putting so much pressure on them to like walk this tightrope, and they're doing their best to figure out how to walk it, right? Um and I think Hamaguchi is being trained by the top minds of PR on how to best uh genuinely communicate what they want communicated by the game, you know. So I'm not saying that devs are lying. I'm not saying that devs are, don't know what's going on. I think a body of work this large, with journalists this rabid, with this much sacrosanct discourse on the subject, there's going to be dev inconsistencies, right? So I think a good rule, on how to best maybe sort of value what people say is, uh, look at which dev is saying it and how involved they are in the project. Chances are Hamaguchi is not going to mislead us on the game that he is literally the director of, right? Like this trilogy is his, like he's the head of a creative studio as a result of this, you know. Throw that, and then the game itself is always going to be the strongest developer statement. The game conveys information better than a PR guy writing articles for the press website. And again, that person does a great job. If you're listening, you do a great job. But like there's this insane pressure to like, oh, does this thing that I said confirm? No, he's just summarizing, what he thinks the general consensus experience of the game was. Like, it's clear at the end of Rebirth that the way that scene goes out, something is afoot, you know? And he is director of Square Enix now, Hamaguchi. He just a creative studio. He's sort of a on the board. Yeah. I wish more people just use the game as the source of the game's information, presentation, or context. Yeah, they can't. They got it. They have to, you know, uh, scour Twitter for 150 character summaries of developer interviews. That's how you learn what games are about. You don't play the game, Susie. That would be crazy. No, that's a fantastic point. I do. It's very annoying. Um, the Sphere Hunter. The problem with it that is you kind of need the Ultimania and additional materials to make full sense of it. I disagree with that. I disagree with that. Um, if you're 2/3 into a trilogy, a good a good story with things that are open ended should not make full sense to you, right? You don't need to make full sense of it yet. If by the end of the third entry, whose major theme word is resolve, if those mysteries aren't resolved, and the only way that you understand it is by reading a Ultimania, then yeah, I think we're in some trouble, right? If you need dev quotes to understand a thing that is supposed to be resolved, then we're in some trouble artistically and storytelling wise. If but that kind of criticism would say apply to Final Fantasy 16, which is not a game that has an unresolved sequel. That game is supposed to be a wrapper, that contains a whole story, right? So if you played Final Fantasy 16 and you felt like it didn't resolve, and you felt like it was meant to, but you read the Ultimania and find out that, the main character did in fact die, or didn't in fact die, or, you know, something of that nature. That's a pretty fair complaint. You know, that's a fair indication that yes, I need an Ultimania to understand a game. Do I like reading Ultimanias? Of course. I love, because I like breaking down this art. I love expanding on Final Fantasy VII. I like getting more context. But Final Fantasy VII OG by itself was enough for me. Like it wrapped itself up enough. And if I'm being totally honest, the Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth did so as well. Did I have all the answers? Of course not. Was I supposed to? Also, of course not. We are 2/3 into something, you know? So, um, the Ultimania is more just for me as a mega fan to engage in, be most possibly aware of what's going on. Ultimania helps you pick out details you didn't pick out before, allow you to appreciate it more. And then we can also discuss it here, And it's more just, yeah, it's fascination. And absolutely ain't saying the game is bad, but I generally believe pacing problems might confuse people. If by the third game there's no resolve, then the problem are the games themselves. Yeah. I think that, and if you aren't a absurd completionist, um, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth probably has the best pacing of any Final Fantasy. If you are an absurd completionist, you might say it's got, that the pacing might feel off at places, but nowhere near what most open world games that are story driven have. You know, very few games that have huge open worlds have as narratively driven of a story. You know, um, the same people that criticize yellow paint criticize the story for not hand holding them. Yeah, it's always, yeah. Yeah, and look, there are people that are just like desperate to not like a thing, and will move goalposts around to keep it not liked. And a lot of those people, by the way, I'm just going to be totally honest. This is my, there are exceptions. So, be aware. I don't think that um, everybody that is ultra critical of Final Fantasy VII Remake falls in this camp, but the correlation is super high. A lot of people that are really against this stuff right here are really against that stuff as well. Um, like there's one guy in particular, and I'm not even saying that these are his views, but if you look through who's responding, 90% of them have stuff like this littered through their timeline, like criticizing, diversity in games, very, very anti woke. The label that they've got is now is chuds, and yes, it's a label given to them, but they've adopted it like it's some kind of um, badge of honor. And so, and whether that person, we'll just call them the main FF7 hater, um, uh, believes it or not, um, he uses a lot of dog whistles. He'll say words that are common among that community, among the Chud community, to mobilize them. He'll reference pieces of art that are historically stoic and conservative, and take pot shots at things that you know that seem to align with the same pot shots, you know, and that the chuds take. And and uh there's engagement in that, right? That's, there the particularly on one platform, that engagement is driven, right? So um, it's picked up some traction because the algorithm has allowed it to do so, right? So the algorithm's really good at you know, figuring out specifically what kind of content you're more likely to engage in, you know, based on you as a person. And it finds people that really you know, have this uh catharsis or insecure attachment, you know, to media and feelings they had, you know, and this, you know, gripping terror about things moving away from that, you know, and so um, you'll see people really identify uh, with a lot of conservatism, both artistically and politically. You know, there are exceptions for sure. There are people that, you know, are uh, very, very anti DEI, anti woke, that like Final Fantasy VII Remake, um, until their friends tell them that they're not allowed to, and then they suddenly switch, you know, um, and vice versa. You know, there are people that really just didn't appreciate it for media reasons. You know, so I'm not saying that there aren't exceptions, but what I guess I'm trying to explain is why now? Why are we seeing more of this? What's the virality? Why is this a viral thing? And it really boils down to that. And you'll also notice that it's really super more common on one platform than the rest of them, you know, and it's on the platform that's owned by Shinra, right? So yeah, let's see here. Yeah, yeah, Cammy's been fighting a good fight too, um, because it, you know, like it's really important. The narrative, then, you know, so much is about like this narrative that all of this stuff is creating, you know, all of these things that I specifically don't like about this game are what's creating a financial downfall for, you know, Final Fantasy and for Square Enix. Square Enix will fall because I was right about this thing. Is such an important narrative to so many people. So they're so unwilling to really parse information about what's going on with the industry. You know, and really what's going on with the industry is uh, full price games are not selling what they used to. Um, and you know, games that sort of break the mold and do really well usually have some weird, hard to predict thing that drives their sales. It's sometimes quality, but not always. In fact, kind of rarely. A lot of times it's something else, like timing or country attachment. Like, um, you know, China's been really generating a cultural identity around gaming. And so you'll see these games that aren't reviewed well, that nobody plays here, you know, dominate charts. And you're like, what happened? You know, there's this, you know, and it's like something cultural, right? And it doesn't mean that those games are bad. That's not what I'm saying. Those games are good, actually. Um, and they're getting better. You know, like I'm really excited for a lot of games that are coming out of China right now. Um, you know, but they don't, so there's this relationship between sales and these factors that aren't at all connected to whether a game is woke or not, or, you know, anything. And gaming consoles are going up. Like, who knew that my PS5 Pro would be an appreciating investment, you know? um it's harder to buy consoles, it's harder to you know, it's gaming is a lot harder financially because inflation hits everything. And even though prices haven't gone up, it's still, you know, we're in this weird spot where this type of media is, it's a mature market, and it's, you know, things aren't selling the way they were. So, you know, that brings us back to discourse, right? So why is discourse important? with Final Fantasy VII Revelation? Why is Hamaguchi encouraging us with things that say, we don't know whether or not this connects to Advent Children or not? We don't know where this leads. And it's because they want you to talk about it. Why do they want you to talk about it? Well, again, I bring us back to November. In November, the gaming landscape could change. And I really think that what could happen is a lot of this conversation, like the one we're having right now about, the is it woke, is going to just disappear. Because Grand Theft Auto 6 is coming out, and Grand Theft Auto 6 brings a level of player engagement that will just silence any other discourse, right? So like you're seeing a lot of these same people that are like, that are commenting under this post and these articles, like looking for, and I'm not making this up, they're examining the lighting of the Grand Theft Auto cover art and saying, oh, look, it's bisexual lighting. Oh, look, Grand Theft Auto 6 has gone woke, And Grand Theft Auto has never been anything but exactly what it is. It's loudly everything. It's a reflection of society. It's a caricature of society. There's going to be everything. Just like Hamaguchi is saying, this is trying to represent a world that we identify. Grand Theft Auto is going to do that hard and comically and intensely, and it's going to bring millions of people, not thousands of people, millions of people that will drown out that conversation. And I ultimately think Grand Theft Auto 6 is one of the things that will re-inject life into gaming overall. A lot of people will buy consoles, and then they'll get done with Grand Theft Auto and be like, hey, what have I missed since the last Grand Theft Auto? And they'll get into gaming again. Maybe they'll, like, there's a generational alignment with a lot of games coming out in 2027, that are attached to people that had strong identities in Grand Theft Auto 4 and 5, and I think Final Fantasy 7, believe it or not, is one of those things. I think it's a positive thing for Final Fantasy and for Square Enix and for Kingdom Hearts and for video games that Grand Theft Auto 6 is coming in November. And I think one of the things it will do is it will outnumber this weird insular criticism, culture war stuff. It will drown that out 100,000 to 1. Yeah, what does it even mean? I know, but it's a real thing. Like that's a legitimate thing that comes up. So is annoying. Yeah, I can't tell you how many of my less gamer savvy friends play games this way. When the new Rockstar game comes out, they will get it, play it, then for a few months or even years, play other games. Yeah, exactly. Like that's how you get casuals. That's how you go from, 2 million people worldwide being heavily invested in your thing to 200 million, right? Like we're talking such a massive difference in engagement when you get the general populace. Like it's a cultural watershed moment. Like Grand Theft Auto 5 came out and it changed the way everybody in LA drove, what music they listened to. Like it was a part of the culture, and like, yeah, I mean, it's a big deal. So, and I expect the same thing will happen with Grand Theft Auto 6. I've grown out of GTA hype. Yeah, and most of us, like the people that have been heavily gaming, we're not casuals. I'm sorry. I hate to put any of you guys, all 200-300 of you that are here right now into any kind of category, but none of us are casuals. If you're listening to a podcast of a guy talking about interviews for a game that's coming out next year, you're not a casual. Like that's just not, you know, that's not drown it out. No, it will increase it. I don't think so. I think it'll change it aggressively. I think more people, yeah. I don't think anything like bisexual lighting in a like the really ridiculous stuff is gonna fly with casuals. It's not, that's not entertaining or interesting. None of that stuff's gonna get traction, or it'll be like a cartoon. Like it'll be it'll probably be referenced in the game. They'll be like, oh, look at this. There's probably gonna be it's probably gonna be and Florida is such a good place. Like in the same way um, in the same way that Los Santos was a really good place. Yeah, me, just a casual. Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. There's nobody here is a casual. We're all we're all in a different category of fandom. Yeah, and I mean, just think about your normal friends that like stuff, and ask them what podcasts they listen to about that stuff. You know exactly, exactly. Okay, so to get into story stuff, let me go back to this while I pull up the doozy, the absolute doozy. Um, and this came out a few days ago, and I've already commented on socials and stuff like that. And Subtext did a big 7 hour stream, and he kind of talked about it. And 22 seconds of that was taken way out of context and turned into dumb stuff because this is Twitter, and it's full of all these non-casuals, you know. So, oh yeah, you guys can't see each other's chat. It's true. I forgot. Um, okay. So I'll just read this instead of showing it, but it made the rounds. It's from the gamer also. It made the rounds, and okay. All right. When I asked about the narrative changes to come in Revelation, Hamaguchi was coy. Um, but was able to expand on the roles that Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus have come to play in the remake universe. Okay, and this was a big deal. Okay, the remake trilogy was always intended to become a complete retelling of Final Fantasy VII Compilation, a project that includes not only the original game, but Advent Children and all of its spin-offs. So once the credits start to roll on Revelation, I guess you consider all of them canon. Here's what Hamaguchi had to say. It's more accurate to consider Final Fantasy VII Advent Children to be a part of the original FF7's canon rather than the remake series canon. This is because the remake series has not yet been completed, and since we have not revealed how it will conclude at this stage, we don't believe it'd be appropriate to share whether it's canon or not. Okay, now why was this such a big deal? Well, I think that's because um for like at least within the fandom, a lot of people have been hanging their hats on some quotes that vaguely suggested that um it's basically just a remake, right? And that's never really been the identity of this thing ever. right? And again, a problem with trusting just dev quotes. And here, what we're getting is a clear sense that as of now, there's nothing that officially suggests that these two continuities are officially linked as of yet. We can't tell you if they link or not until the game is over, right? And so both sides of this interpretation of Final Fantasy VII Remake felt this was somehow confirmation. And you notice that a lot here. And it's kind of how you know that a dev quote is good. It's how you know what Hamaguchi is really doing. What he's really doing is he's saying, I want you guys to talk about this. You know, I want you guys, I want you to hold that theory. I want you to be a sequeler. I want you to be an RHG or a red herring gang. I want you guys to discuss that stuff because it's a fun marketplace of ideas and it's a way for us to keep this alive. I'm sure he doesn't think, oh, you guys should cancel each other over it, create factions over it, and you know, be insane to each other over it. I'm sure that's not what he means, but he does recognize it's a fun part of this, and for the most part, most people that engage in that conversation are having fun. And I think if you want to look at a good community that really like enjoys that, look at Max Dudes, right? And again, I don't agree with everything that Max Dude has to say. He doesn't care. He doesn't agree with everything I have to say. We agree on a lot of stuff. We evaluate the art similarly, but his community is all about welcoming the conversation, right? And so that's sort of who Hamaguchi is getting behind. So if you're wondering why Hamaguchi showed up in and did an interview with Max Dude, it's not because Max Dude is a paid shill. It's because Hamaguchi is marketing the game, and he recognized that that community is is aligning itself most with what the project is trying to achieve right now, which is conversation, right? Um, it's not confirmation that any of the stuff that gets discussed on Max streams is going to come to pass. You know, it's not confirmation of any of that, but it is acknowledgement that this is what they want. You know, and that's smart. That's a good thing. Um, if you want to know what I'm getting, you know, from this is that we are going to see Final Fantasy VII Revelation end in a more extravagant way than the OG. And what could that look like? There's a few things. Whether it connects to the OG's continuity by some mechanism or not is not super important to me. And I know that's probably surprising because I've been labeled as a sequelist. I don't actually think, even if that were to happen, like let's say, you know, at the edge of creation, you know, right before the final battle, you have to fight both Sephiroth and Polygon Sephiroth from the OG. Like, even if that shit happened and it was so clear, I wouldn't actually think that sequel is the right term for that mechanically. Okay. So what would be the right term? I don't know, but I don't think sequel is it. I think that just a lot of people choose that because they don't know what else to call this thing. It doesn't have a ton of precedent, right? Um, and whether or not they make some kind of tie, I'm sure it would be more tasteful than that if they did. Isn't really what's important to me. I think what's important is that they want this to really tightly wrap a bow on Final Fantasy VII. And you can't really do that ending it the way the OG did. You can't. Like, that is not a conclusive end. How do you have post-game exploration, you know, if you have this cinematic, you know, that really does not even expand on the fates of the main characters other than one 498 or 500 years later? Like, you don't even get that until Advent Children, right? So you can't do the OG's ending exactly the same. You've got to reframe it in a way. Things that I think do need to be factored into that, whether we like it or not. Some variant of timelines exist in Final Fantasy VII. Whether they're pitching it as something that has always been there, but they just didn't have in the OG the technical and an overall production real estate to express this idea, or they've just decided to add it. That's timelines exist. They do. Are they made of spiritual life stream particles? And is it happening in some kind of dreamlike state? That's also probably true. Are they timelines? Well, to my face, Hamaguchi called them timelines. So they are timelines. Timeline has an incredibly wide definition. Continuity, timeline, whatever. It's got a wide enough definition that the person deciding what it's called can be prescriptive of it, right? So you may look at a list of things that timeline could define, like in a dictionary. That would be descriptive, but it doesn't have the ability to prescribe meaning. There's like literally a handful of human beings on Earth that have the prescriptive authority to tell me if timelines are in Final Fantasy VII are. And Hamaguchi is on the top of that list and is the one that prescribed said definition. So yes, Hamaguchi said there are timelines. There are timelines. Whether they're whatever annoying timeline shenanigan nonsense you guys want to argue about what that is, that's a completely different thing. You know? Yeah, they're made of live stream. They're made of dreams. And so that's different somehow. Okay, sure. But in Final Fantasy 7, dreams, like have the power to fill up a materia, and then you can use that materia to summon a giant monster that kills people IRL and sends them back into that live stream that's made of dreams. It's a completely different ball game. so timeline is still a fine prescriptive definition that has enough explanatory power to be significant to the conversation. That is in play in the way that this game ultimately ends. Okay. In this, there is a greater emphasis on prescience, right? Future sight. We have a whole scene at the edge of creation, which is interestingly on the other side of that galaxy we see in the beginning of the Revelations trailer, right? Where Sephiroth clearly recognizes that this, hold on, I've just been getting nonstop. Okay. Thank you, Susie. Okay, so Sephiroth is clearly at the edge of creation, which is either a meteor or some spot that is on the other side of that, is a mirror, either on the other side or a mirror of the galaxy we see at the beginning of the Revelations trailer. So he has this super creepy, context rife speech about 7 seconds to the end. The creepiest version of the, listen to the cries of the planet is playing. And he blocks what looks like the beginning of Omnislash. Like, it's meant to mirror the end of Final Fantasy VII OG, but in this more explicit way. So that is a piece of context where Sephiroth clearly has more context than he did in the OG. And that's where the sequel theory was really born, right? It's like Sephiroth is remaking Final Fantasy. Okay. There's something to that has to resolve meaningfully. It doesn't have to resolve in the broad and kind of maybe ham-fisted way that that a lot of the sequel framing has, where it's like, future Sephiroth after Advent Children, after Dirge of Cerberus came back, because he just would not be a memory this time, and he came back, but this time, his meddling with with time triggered Aerith to also be aware of things, and so she's going to change things too. She's going to fight. Like, I don't know if it's going to be something that, kind of rough. But it has to be something, right? Has to be something that ultimately affects the way the ending is portrayed, right? We can't just have the same scene as we did, but Cloud wins this time. We can't just have him finish Omnislash and this time Sephiroth doesn't have a shirt. Like, that's dumb. Like, people won't buy that, and that's very clearly not what Hamaguchi is promising. Hamaguchi is ultra confident that people in both sides of this, he's aware that both sides of this and I hate to use sides, but that everybody on the spectrum of wanting deviation to wanting it to remain faithful, everybody on that spectrum of thought, he's confident that everybody there will be happy with the resolution. And that's obviously fairly impossible because a lot of those people have positions that exclude other people's, wishes. And so that's, it's a tall order. But what he's saying, but what I understand from that, he's aware of that. He is aware that we need more from the ending than just a completion of 7 seconds to the end. This time Sephiroth has no shirt and Cloud finishes his Omnislash and wins. Like, we need something else. So that fact still remains front and center for the question that we're talking about right now, and that is how these two continuities resolve each other, or if they resolve each other. That the end of Remake, Edge of Creation, how that relates to Ever Crisis, even, all of that is still super important to me, and I think really central to the answer to this. The other really much smaller detail, and I bring this up a lot, and a lot of people are really like, what are you talking about? This is stupid. I'm pretty confident on this one. Nomura doesn't say much anymore about anything. He will occasionally come out and be like, blah, 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 this project is really important to me. And then he'll say, stuff, I like this piece of art. And then he'll do these drawings. But the thing that I found most interesting, and I'll pull it up here, is he did release some art. And he didn't just like say this to like some random interviewer. He put it on official Square Enix letterhead and posted it to social. Okay. When he made the art for Safer Sephiroth for Magic the Gathering, he said, This time around, I drew Sephiroth on both the front and back sides of the card. I actually drew them so that they would join if placed on top of one another. So if you manage to get the two of the same card and line them up, you'll see how the original illustration looked. There is also a reason that the design for Safer Sephiroth is different from the original game, but I unfortunately can't share more about that. Okay, and I'll pull it up for us to look at. Oops, wrong one. But I'm telling you, this is one of the most important things about how that question gets answered. How do you end this game satisfyingly? You know, how do you wrap up all the parts of the compilation into this new continuity that includes all of them in a way that subverts any expectation whatsoever, but still maintains themes? And I think this is part of the answer. So what's the main difference? I'll ask you guys. It is a great card. Yeah. Let me see if I can pull up the full art. My boy Ray posted it. Did. This is the full art. It even has young Sephiroth too, which I would not be surprised if young Sephiroth made an appearance. Oh, that's right. Twitter's really bad. Just save it. Oh, thank you. How can he be confident knowing that there's only one ending? There's nothing that I can think of that satisfies everyone. Any thoughts? I mean, first of all, thank you for the super chat. Second of all, I don't think you can, right? But he has definitively shut down that there are multiple endings, right? So that was one of the first things that happened is he said player choice has a much bigger impact on the way the story unfolds, but there is one singular ending. And he said that to about 3 different people, including Hayes Madsen, right? So that is a big mystery, right? So it sounds like the way player choice is implemented, the way I'm reading it, and not everybody read it this way, but the way I'm reading it, and it isn't explicit, but I think that this time other choices will be from the POV of other characters than Cloud, and they will gate certain, maybe even places and events, based on choices that those characters make when either you're in charge of them or at different moments throughout the story. And we have missables this time, a lot more missable things. And I think before it was like single scenes that would have different resolutions. I think this time it's probably like we might lose whole areas as a result. As far as the ending though, they've been super consistent. One ending. Okay. How do you satisfy everybody? You honestly, you don't. And personally, you know, I would rather not be satisfied by the ending than there be an ending that was tailored to me, if that makes sense. I want the artist to do what they want to do. I believe in that, you know, truly. Um, but um, you know, character relationships, even things that are personal to the characters' hearts, those are going to be things that are more attached to player expression. But the actual end scenario, I don't know if anybody's like personal wishes for the story, um, you know, really doesn't involve the ending. You know, I think everybody that's got like a super vested interest in the story going one way or another isn't going to be satisfied with things that don't involve its conclusion. So I do think it's a really tall order, you know. But here's again, and I'll say this till I'm blue in the face. Uh, I want to be blown away in a way I never thought of. Right? I want them to think of something that I never thought of, uh, because I never thought of Final Fantasy VII. You know, um, and so if they surprise me, I'm going to be so excited for that. You know, um, to be honest, if it's exactly like the OG, I'd be unsure myself because I don't want others who genuinely want more than AC to be disappointed. Yeah. I mean, it just kind of doesn't make sense at this point, right? Like, we have a little bit too much context for that to be a satisfying conclusion to the story, right? Like, even if AC is canon, right? It's a weird place to end the game. It was it was art, it was pure art when we didn't have AC, when we didn't know there was stuff beyond, you know. Um, but yeah, so to answer your question, I don't think there's a way that you can satisfy everyone with a singular ending, and I think that the always the trade off with multiple endings is, you know, with a story with as much pressure on it as Final Fantasy VII, multiple endings instead run the risk of um, being unsatisfactory to everyone, right? Like, because the very fact that one ending exists and that one or that more than one ending exists is sometimes a deal breaker for people. Like, it's enough for people to be like, I am no longer invested in this. And you know, I for me that's not the issue. For me, the issue is that a lot of times multiple endings feel like inauthentic. They feel like they were made for the fans instead of for the art, right? Like, that's what they're meant to serve. And I just have a general artistry issue with that. But so back to the ending discussion. What is different about Sephiroth here? He's got an arm. Why is that a big deal? Why is it a big deal that Sephiroth has another arm? Um, well, first and foremost, it's a big deal because Nomura says it is. He posted a graphic saying that he posted to social media saying, like, if you're wondering about the new design, I can't share it just yet. He had no reason. He could have just done it and never said anything. We wouldn't be talking about it. He made an effort, you know, and to express this. And there are other things that people have noticed. You know, there seems to be some markings on the face that seem a little bit. Yeah, they actually have got like kind of. So I've had people say this. He's like, oh, it looks like is that oh they made him look like Seymour. This is a Final Fantasy X reference. I'm not saying that. I'm saying he's complete, right? he's whole, right? That's the difference. Safer Sephiroth is whole, right? So something new about about Sephiroth's endgame is involves him being complete. And it feels like a nothing burger when you look at Rebirth. But the Ore Watashi thing with Sephiroth, where he talks and he uses different pronouns, that's something that a lot of people playing in Japanese noticed, and that we didn't notice, as Americans, because that context is lost. Um, and I don't think you need to have noticed that to feel like the end of Rebirth was, or the end of Remake opened up this bizarre door. Like, for instance, like if you watch Max's first response, Max, I'm, hate to use Max as an example, but Max's first reaction to the Edge of Creation scene, he was like, oh my God, Sephiroth is remaking the timeline. It's different this time. And, um, the English localization is a little bit more on the nose with some of the mystery stuff, whereas it's a little bit more literal in Japanese. But there is Japanese subtext that we miss, like the Ore Watashi thing. That's a different way of saying, different pronouns that he's using for himself. And is that noteworthy? Well, a lot of Japanese users or Japanese players noticed it, mentioned it, and they thought it was noteworthy. Does that mean it's noteworthy? Not necessarily. However, where most of us in the West heard about this was from official documentation. In the remake Ultimania, they made special points to highlight that he uses different pronouns. And they also like make this chart of the forms of Sephiroth. Now those forms it's not like there's 4 Sephiroths. Like that gets clarified later. That gets clarified in the remake plus Ultimania. And it's annoying there's so many Ultimanias. But or in the remake materials Ultimania. Toriyama says there's one singular will of Sephiroth that controls all the different forms. So that's a later thing. But and I think that was to quell the idea that there's a good Sephiroth versus a bad Sephiroth and stuff like that. But instead to let us know that Sephiroth has got his fingers in a lot more jars this time. And the remake Ultimania also leaned heavily into things like, it's really weird that the Aerith knows stuff this time. Like it was the remake Ultimania. Square Enix did that. This isn't something that fans took and ran with. That is a thing that was in official documentation. Okay. So I still think that those details, along with the fact that we see an enhanced final form of Sephiroth, indicate the core nature of how this game will wrap up in a way that's more conclusive and more, I think, Final Fantasy 70. Is it a sequel? I would never have used that word in the first place. Is it the kind of sequel that most people are talking when they use the word sequel? Is it that, like most of the theory community? I'm like 50% on that. And I don't care. Like totally. Like it's a cool thing when you get something to connect like that, because it like the fans that have been kind of like paying attention, if they get a canonical connection, like it can sometimes feel good mechanically. Whether or not that has an impact on character fates is a completely different question. And whether or not it has impact on character fates is the core, I think, interest that makes this conversation between members of this spectrum so volatile, right? And we'd like to pretend that that's not true, but you know, recapitulation. I don't think a more conclusive ending makes it a sequel necessarily unless it's explicitly showed or stated. It doesn't. Not at all. Um right, and I don't think even so, and again, when most people, when they say I want a sequel or that I think it's a sequel, are saying is that there is a mechanical event that connects these two now confirmed independent canons to each other somehow, like some causal link. All that needs to happen for the sequel people to feel like, hey, I was right, it's a sequel, you know, is if that happens. Um and then they're done. Uh and if that happens, I will applaud that. I'm like, good job. That's really hard to pull off. You know? That's really hard to pull off. But I don't, it doesn't really like deliver on any of the themes or messaging that I care about. So I could go either way. And do I think that if it does that, it's a sequel? Um, no, but I'll support the people that do. I'll be like, oh, good job. I'm glad that you got this thing that you wanted. I'd still fundamentally disagree with the definition sequel if that happens. If it doesn't happen, and it just turns out this is a full blown new continuity that that is altered to include things like a two-armed Sephiroth uh and an Ultimania that tells us to like pay attention to what pronouns Sephiroth is using, and to the fact that Aerith knows things that she shouldn't. Like if that is just like part of the spiciness of the remake, again, I'm okay if the conclusion delivers on it somehow. And I just personally don't think that it can deliver if it just ends at, you know, uh Cloud dangling from the high wind, and then roll credits, and then 500 years later, or 500 years later and then roll credits. Like, I don't see that as being something that really delivers on any of the meta plot. Um and I think a lot of people on all sides of the spectrum would agree with that, you know? And then when you really like bore down into what they're afraid of with like a quote unquote sequel happening, it's something else entirely, right? It's something like, I don't want Zach to live, you know? Because it undercuts Cloud's journey if Cloud didn't sacrifice himself, or if Zach didn't sacrifice himself. It undercuts the theme of life if Aerith somehow gets revived. Those are all interesting questions. Those are all valid concerns. Over a story that helped you. Maybe it helped you deal with grief, and you feel like, okay, that's taken back now. Like losing Aerith made me help me, deal with and process feelings of losing my mom, or my brother. And now they're presenting a version of the story where she could be revived. And it feels like it diminished my grieving. That's a valid thing, and, or, like, I've always really liked Final Fantasy VII, but I feel like, it was sort of a trope to sacrifice Aerith. They kind of, she was kind of fell into a fridge trope, and I really identified with her, and I think that the story would have been served more if she had survived. That's a valid feeling too. And wanting that is a valid thing. But I would just say talk about that instead of really like separating yourself from that and getting into, is it a sequel or is it a remake, a spicy remake? Like, all these broad categories just have a tendency to be generally talking past our interests. And yes, relationships, chipping does factor in. It does heavily influence how people process this story. And that's that. And I've gone through a bunch of growth, we'll call it, and learning when it comes to uh, interacting with that. Like it's the shippers are valid fans, and I have had run-ins with shippers, and there have been times where I felt like so demotivated for discussing lore, um, because every like a bunch of people with said characters PFP all of a sudden have banded together, and it's the same 20 to 40 people that that all like just are constantly posting their ships art and blah blah blah. They will come and brigade some point I'm making, and so I just I have a tendency to be like, oh man, they're really, the shippers are really infecting the conversation. And that's a broad generalization. It's those 40 people that are in infesting the conversation, and adding toxicity, you know, um, and that's the truth, right? Um, and I think Super Ramio said it here too, and I agree. It's like I think the two sides agree on more than they realize. I do too. And I think a lot of this comes from us being unclear about what we want, and instead being threatened by the way a possibility can potentially impact a specific interest that we're not talking about, you know and we can just be forthright, like, I don't want this to happen because it can threaten this, and then examining, can this thing still happen and not threaten this? And I think once we do that, then we can just talk about the thing we want to talk about. Just be like, I don't like this because it's this. It's I don't like it. You know, and and if you could come to the conclusion, yeah, it's because I don't want my ship to be ruined. You can be honest about that too. That's fine. That's a valid artistic opinion. You can have an interest in that, and if you're clear about it, uh, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong. You know, the shippers are pretty intense, but I will give them credit for keeping it going for 30 years next year. Yeah, yeah, and it's like, um, yeah, and I hate to say it, but like, it sort of proves Hamaguchi's strategy to be kind of smart. What is something that has kept Final Fantasy VII discourse alive for years when it's been, when a lot of people have ultimately agreed on what its core themes were, and like that, like entire generations have been born since it came, and it is this kind of discussion, so um so for him to now be making these statements that really point to a discussion oriented marketing cycle, you know um I think that's good. And I also noticed that Hamaguchi is doing his best to like allow for player interpretation with relationships, to some degree. Um will I still think there's a chance that the story might like make a little bit firmer of a statement. than he did. And I'm not even going to say on which side. I don't know. Um, but I think ultimately, like, there is a good part of the story that works well and still communicates its themes clearly and its messaging clearly if player interpretation is doing some of the work. And I think this is one of those areas. Okay. I think there are elements of Tifa's relationship to Cloud that are essential to the story, right? Like, and it's his awakening, it's his understanding who he is, and that is invaluable, but that's something that, but that kind of love is, it's something that I would do for Blitz, or Steed. I would jump into the live stream to help you find yourself, Steed. Like, and it's because people matter, like, and um Tifa makes that choice because it's something about her, right? It's something that, like, it matters. Like, she's lost everything. I'm gonna protect this connection. And whether that's romantic or not is something that I think, maybe they have an opinion on, but most of the heavy lifting is still done by Cloud's response to it in a human way, in a way that relates to the whole world and not just Tifa, you know. Um, and I think the same goes for Aerith and his relationship to her. I think there's uh, a good case can be made for the intensity of their connection, and that does stay consistent, and um there is an element that I think is meant to be interpreted, there. And uh I think different developers have different interpretations themselves that they express whenever they get the opportunity to, and I think Nojima, he really thinks that there's one in particular, and he expresses that when he gets a chance, and I think other developers might be different. I'm not going to name anybody, but anymore, because I think Nojima is just too clear, and I can't really. There's no plausible deniability. But um, the point I'm trying to make is that you know, there are elements of the story that, if left to player interpretation, enhance the core themes like life and love and self-acceptance if they're left to player interpretation. However, we are now at the state where so much of the remake trilogy has been made explicit and fleshed out and given more context that they need to resolve in a way befitting of that nuance. And I think one of those is the ending, and I think the ending really does need to address, the anxiety producing quandary set up at the beginning of Remake Part 1, and um, and then sort of respond to um, the downturn and confusion at the end of Rebirth, like Part 2, and having this really unclear ending, having it seeing all the kind of pieces break. And it's still, I think, the strongest part of subtext video is just that it's very clear that that was intentional, right? Like, we were like, this is a weird big mystery, it's gonna go completely off the rails. And then Part 2, it's following along, and a lot of people say that it hugely diverted because, I don't know, because the bald bar had more context, and uh because you have to press buttons better to win battles. like that it's a huge diversion. But for the most part, people were like, okay, so kind of that weird meta nonsense is just gone now, I guess, and it's all just Cloud is confused, right? And nothing about that was actually a answer to any question asked in the beginning of Remake. That was the red herring. Is that there's this idea that, oh, now we know what's going on. No, we don't. In fact, like, it was just the antithesis to something, to a thesis that was, sort of presented in Remake. And do I think that's the capital D Destiny stuff? A little bit. Do I think that Destiny just references, the overall story, like the fate of the planet? A little bit. But do I also think that it's about the conversation that, SE is having with its fans? That too. Do I think it's more than that? Yeah. I also think it's more than that, you know? And it sounds more and more like Hamaguchi is aware that all of this happens, that all of these conversations are occurring, and is saying that the ending will address it, and that he's not willing to say, hey, oh yeah, you're right. It's just been a spicy remake. It is all just a red herring, to make you think that it was going to be the different, but it's going to be the same. He's definitely not saying that. He's also not saying like, oh yeah, it's this bizarre multiversal MCU thing where Peter Parker and Doctor Strange team up, and then you get Aerith back. He's definitely not saying that either. So how do you split the difference? And he's aware that he has to. And Revelation is such a brave title, and Resolve is such a theme, solid, like such a brave theme for that, because he knows we need revelation. We need liberation. We need freedom from the bondage of the mystery. And we need resolve, which is not only like a way that, like something that drives a person to, get through their difficulties, which Cloud obviously gets in the live stream sequence. We also need to resolve the problems set up in the previous two games, and same with Revelation, learning the truth about yourself, and, uh, but also learning what this is all about, and learning what the unknown journey resolves to. And I mean, I doubt that that's going to be a known journey. I doubt what he's saying is that it's going to end the same way. I just do. I don't think any of this makes sense if it just ends the same way. So it's got to end extra. And I think the way that it ends extra might not involve, multiversal nonsense, but it might connect to the broader Final Fantasy VII experience, to all of its fans, to all the experiences in a way that makes us feel all included, and like this, I mean, 11 years since the announcement journey, was worth it. It'll be 12 years, since the announcement, approximately, so like, and something that makes me really recognize that that they are looking is this dumb article about the golden lion statues being in Kidu. Like, he said, I didn't see anybody talk about that. I'm pretty online. I didn't see anybody talk about that either. That's pretty wild. I'm sure maybe somebody did, but like, if you're that online, if you're that tuned into what people are thinking about your game, he knows we're talking about this stuff. So did he craft an ending that just completely cuts one half out, fully knowing, I doubt it. I doubt if he did, that he would be answering the questions the way that he is. He'd be like, yeah, I just made the ending I want. I'm sorry if you hate it. Like, he's not saying that. He's saying, I encourage all of you, even people with these seemingly, incompatible worldviews on how this game should resolve. I encourage all of you to see for yourself. And that's not just him selling the game. Like, he's really interested to see if he nailed it. And I think he thinks he did. So I'm excited for that. Um okay, hold on. Blitz is about. So I'm gonna stay talking for a few more minutes, and then Blitz is gonna go live, and I'm gonna raid him on YouTube. Um, but before that happens, and while that's happening, does anybody have any? Can anybody like highlight questions? Like, chat has actually been going really hard. Um, yes. By the way, I really want. Okay, so if the game ends exactly the same, um, if the game ends up exactly the same, will I be satisfied? And the answer is only if, like we talked about in the beginning, the score system, right? So it still gets a 10 from me if it like way delivers on other stuff. And like how it can do that is get one winged cloud, like either as like a boss fight and then later on as an unlockable costume. Like you fight him, at the end of sort of like the first two chapters or whatever, like the first act of the game. After the prologue, which I'm sure will not be included in any demo and will be hidden and probably either involve young Sephiroth or Zack again. My money's on Zack again. Um, but we won't know about that till the game releases. Okay. One winged cloud, and then you find a way to like get the fusion sword and the Advent Children outfit in the base game, not in DLC, not in DLC Hamaguchi, in the base game. And for it to have different mechanics, you do that and you can just like you just phone in the ending. I won't give a shit. That's see? Like everybody's got different interests. Okay, so that was one thing. The whole reason I'm against the Cloud plus Era thing in the first place is Cloud's journey is about his identity. I think that him ending up in love with someone who only paid attention to him in the first place because she reminded him of Zack by her own admission, even if it was only the beginning, makes his arc messy, in my opinion, especially because his identity was so muddled with Zack's. I don't even like Cloud and Tifa together, to be honest, but I just think narratively is what makes sense. I mean, that's a valid perspective. That's totally fair. Yeah, I I think there's other ways to look at it. Um, but I hear you. Um, I mean, I think for me, why that part is less mechanically critical to Cloud's journey is that what Cloud ultimately realizes about himself is that his strength comes from the things that the world is sort of telling him makes him weak, right? Like relying on his friends, like the fact that he could at 16 overpower Sephiroth, without any Mako juice or Genova cells, because the source of his strength is this, internal potential he has from being kind and gentle and and loving. Like the deconstructing of toxic masculinity is what I liked so much about his realization. And I I think that if we get there, however we get there, if it feels believable and real and relatable and it gets that message across, some of the details could change, you know. Cute shirt, baby seal. I agree. Look, look, look. To Kitty Moon. This is my cat Nebula, by the way. She went to the vet this morning. She had a clean bill of health, etc. But thank you, Heather Lacey. Heather Lacey has an incredible singing voice, by the way. She recently posted a cover of Stick Season, which I absolutely suggest you listen to. I will post it in chat here. I'll post it in chat. If I play it, I'm sure I'll get immediately penalized because okay. I'm posting that in chat. So, but what I'm saying is, however Cloud's hero journey comes to be, like, it worked really well the way that it worked in the OG. And it couldn't have worked in the OG quite as well did it not have the participants it had, right? Can you do more now that we have like this operationalized live stream? Like there's something clearly wrong with the afterlife in the remake continuity, right? Like Zach isn't being whisked up into Angeal's arms, you know. Instead, he's in this confused state, and there's a passed out Aerith in there, and things are amiss. Time is wonky. There's a bunch of stuff that makes it clear that, you know, we now have this separated life stream, right? So we have this mechanic that these errant worlds, errant life streams, timelines, you know, are happening, right? And so with that added context, are there things that could happen that would help Cloud's hero's journey, help ultimately recognize that, you know, the source of Cloud's strength is, you know, is within his love of others, not his need to be an ubermensch, not his need to be this, you know, unattainable hero form that he thought Zack represented, but didn't actually represent. Like one of the things that Crisis Core, you know, for all of its faults, represented to us was that Cloud's view of what Zack is was a little skewed himself. And yes, he did have like some of Zack's characteristics and some of his literal memories, um, you know, through mimetic transfer. We have Ultimanias that have proven this. It's this annoying thing that a lot of people talk about. Yes, he does have some of those physical things. What the live stream sequence still does ultimately is it lets us deconstruct like that version of a hero, you know, like what Cloud is basing how to be a hero on is really unhealthy, you know. And like as somebody that was formerly in the military, I completely agree. You know, I really strongly you know, like that messaging. And if given the new context, they wanted to include other elements of you know, of this new multiversal live stream mechanic to make Cloud's realization uh, hit in a better way, in a deeper way, I'm all for it. You know, as long as it doesn't detract. And I know that that's a sacred scene to a lot of people. And if I were to make a guess, and I hope that I don't get 22-second clipped on this, and I hope I get full clipped. For the record, I think that a good chunk of the way the live stream sequence will go will be the same, but I think that echoes and reverberations of Cloud's realization journey will happen gradually throughout the game instead of just in a singular instance. I think we'll get to spend time with the Cloud that's waking up into his real self, you know. But I have a feeling like we're not going to see all of the live stream sequence at once. I think it's going to be kind of, you know, whether it's the live stream sequence and then additional things that relate to his self-realization that also involve the live stream later on, you know, that involve things like Zack and Aerith and him realizing their fates, blah, blah, blah. You know, all of that stuff, I think, you know, might happen later in the game. Or we get something going where, you know, like we get Cloud back, we get Tifa back. We don't see the scene in its entirety until it kind of goes through the game, and we get it in sort of vignettes. Um, because, you know, I think there's a pacing problem that's genuinely created by this, right? Um, and here's what I mean by that as I wait for Blitz to go live. And that's that in the OG, the live stream sequence hits at a very solid narrative climax point, which is 3/4 of the way into the game. You know, and the that's where a lot of narratives hit their, you know, kind of self-realization point. If we look at the structure of Revelation as it's already presented, right? We know that Cloud is probably free of the live stream in like the first third of the game. So imagine in in the first third of the game seeing the real version of the Nibelheim incident. Like it really loses a lot of its power. To me, right? Like that was such a cool scene in the OG. Like watching like there's just a super and super economic like virtually no music happens during the live stream sequence, um or during the Nibelheim sequence, right? Like the when we see the truth of what happened, um and it's like, to me, the live stream scene hasn't always just been about Claudia. Tifa has come to the conclusions together. They rebuild him together. I'm just not sure how it's going to play out. First of all, welcome in Soldier First Class. It's been a while. I love you, 5 ever. You're going to be on the show too. We're dusting you off. Coming out of retirement. Second of all, I do agree. You know, I agree to some extent that in the OG that was part of it, right? And we saw part of that in chapter 9 of Rebirth already, right? So that's been really like, so I think what they're telling us with that is, don't worry, that stuff's still coming. It's gonna happen. Tifa's still super involved. We saw part of her already, right? So we're gonna get, yeah, we're gonna get more of that. But like I can't imagine, like, to me, like the craziest scene was seeing like Sephiroth just get bodied by teenage, unpowered Cloud. Like that scene went so hard, you know. And that's the scene that it seems really like that's a scene that can happen right before you get like jazzed to go, you know, go fight Sephiroth. You know, and like where you're, oh yeah, actually, you know, I was wrong. Friendship is my power. That's hell yeah, friendship. You know, hell yeah, power of friendship. Hell yeah, toxic masculinity sucks. You know, Sephiroth is weak. He's a bitch. And 16-year-old Cloud can just be like, you know what? I care about my friends and then beat his ass. That's the source of true power. You know, like that was such a strong scene. And that's the scene that feels like if you put that in the first third of the game, um, then what do you do for the last 2/3? Like, well, then what's happening? And it's possible they have an answer for that. It's possible that they are like, they're confident that whatever new shit they've got going on, um, you know, whatever new Advent Children shit or Dirge of Cerberus shit, or like the you know, the deep ground stuff that when we return to Midgar, you know, with Genesis, that they're confident that that will carry the plot forward with us having known the truth of Cloud's identity and us getting to meet the new Cloud, you know, that early. They're confident that that stuff's going to carry us through, but I doubt it. I doubt it. Um, I have a feeling that they've got surprises in store for us for how Cloud finds himself. I think it'll, instead of being this one thing, be many things, and it'll be like, I just don't see how you do it otherwise. And how well they do that ultimately determines how I think how well the game lands. You know. Um, so again, this is not to say that the live stream sequence as it appears, like the Cloud's mind sequence as it appears in the OG, won't happen. You know, it might not happen all at once. It might happen like in like flashbacks as we get more context, you know, or it might happen all at once, but then we get additional context, additional live stream sequences, you know, that where he has additional realizations, you know. Obviously going back to the Forgotten Capital seems like a great place to insert some of this, you know. The live stream sequence will make or break the initial reception. Yeah, there's a few things that really like you can't flub, and the live stream sequence is one of them, and that's even to we'll say reviewers, right? Like it's obviously like fans are going to be the most intense on that scene. um I'm genuinely curious why everyone seems to think the live stream sequence is the climax of the OG. It's the end of the Dark Knight of the Soul plot beat. Defeating Sephiroth is the climax. Um, I think because mostly the devs have said that it's the climax. Is one of the main reasons why people are really confident to say that. But you know, the devs, I will say, you know, in defense of what you're saying, it's not always up to the writers, you know, like how something is received. Um, but it being the turning point of the turning points, it is sort of but that you could argue that that's a climax. So it's the emotional crux of the story, right? So, um, you know, it's the culmination of Cloud's character arc. And uh, if you ask, if you know, you ask 100 people what Final Fantasy VII is about, and you'll probably get different answers. But pretty consistently like, what is Final Fantasy VII about? And I, I know a lot of people really, um, really get into the weeds on this, and will say something like life is what it's about. But that's not an actual answer. That's just like saying, oh, it's about everything. Um, or it's about a lot of things. Like life is synonymous with our experience, and so to say it's about our experience is like it isn't really being specific, and it's kind of a cop out answer. So here's what I'll say is that uh, subtext video about he once again talks he pulls up this, and I still think this is I'm giving him credit, but I think a lot of us had brought this up leading up to this, is that the Cloud's journey is what Final Fantasy VII is about, right? His journey to find himself, to to become one, his self actualization, his shedding of toxic masculinity is what Final Fantasy VII is about. There are all these other themes, that his journey supports, and his journey creates a lens through. The climax of his identity arc is the live stream sequence. So if you are of the mind that Final Fantasy VII is Cloud's story, and Cloud's story's culmination is the live stream sequence, where his identity journey is the live stream sequence, a culmination being thing where a plot arc climaxes, then that's where that answer comes from. But this is us being descriptive, and I don't want to be prescriptive. Again, I keep trying to bring up that differentiation. I think it's a fair, uh, you know, fair assessment of the art to say no. The final battle with Sephiroth is the climax. And in some ways, like dramatically, like the Safer Sephiroth fight is so climactic. Like, and I like within the context of the OG ending is perfect. I think you can't beat it. I don't think you could end the remake trilogy that way and it be good. I think it wouldn't be it would be anticlimactic, right? But like the Safer Sephiroth fight, I mean, like, that was insane. And I know that I'm dating myself a lot, and there are people that are archaic like I am in this chat and in this community talking it up, and they remember. But like, if you play that on the PS1, like, the soundtrack's great and everything, but it's all this clearly just 16-bit MIDI, MIDI files with, like these synth beats. We would call it retro now, and it's good, but you don't hear any instruments. You don't hear any non-electronic sounds. And you certainly don't hear like a chorus, right? You get to Safer Sephiroth and you start hearing singing, and you're like, what the fuck? This is fucking bonkers. Like, it was absolutely a climax, and then he does Supernova, and like Earth gets destroyed, like the planet we're on. Like, that shit was crazy. So there is absolutely a valid interpretation of the art. The idea that the culmination of the game was the Sephiroth fight and the ending. So please note that I'm not trying to take that away. And then you said, I actually don't agree that the live stream is the climax of Cloud's character arc. It is the emotional turning point of it yet, but that's a different thing from the climax. Okay. That's fair. And you know how to agree. And, there are things that people say, like, just en masse about a scene that, like, I'm like, I don't feel that way. I don't know why you do. I guess I could sort of explain that him knowing the truth about it is when he becomes himself. And if, honestly, if the narrative is him finding himself, I think, that's the climax of it, and of him finding himself. Uh, and then, the conclusion of the story is him using that self that he climaxed into, um, to ultimately defeat Sephiroth again. Uh, is more of a conclusive arc than it is a the actual climax. And so, and we're mincing terms, and I don't necessarily uh think it matters too much. Like, I think this is just us, you know, I think being clear with each other that this is a very important scene, right? Like, the live stream sequence is really important. You don't agree that it's the climax. You probably think that it's a resolution, at least. And if we're resolving things, if that's the theme, it's certainly a resolution and a revelation and a liberation, right? It's all of those things. Enough too that I think that it not being in the final third of the game is going to present hype problems to carry the plot through. The live stream is the climax of the OG because that's when the plot unravels and the truth about Cloud comes to life. That is Cloud's resolution and culmination. Defeating Sephiroth is the ending. Yeah, yeah. Why you're defeating Sephiroth comes from the live stream revelation. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so that's what we're saying. I hope you understand what we're saying, even if you don't less necessarily like agree with our vernacular choices. Hey, Peter, welcome in. You think they'll fake us out? Steed, what do you think? Okay, you know what? Actually, so Steed is going to be on my show. Um, it took a lot of convincing, but I finally decided that Steed has taken enough abuse from all the different sides of this fandom spectrum, and he deserves a shot. He's earned his way. So we will get Steed on here. So there has to be a surprise in. Okay, well, we'll talk about that surprise when you're on. The live stream scene is the most important scene in Cloud's story. Yes, the Nibelheim incident, Zack's death, etc. are all important. The live stream scene is where Cloud becomes the hero. Yeah, yeah, it's where Final Fantasy VII defines what a hero is. And there's a lot of talk about what a hero is up until that point, and we're presented with a bunch of wrong ones, a bunch of ones that aren't real, that aren't healthy, that aren't sustainable, that are based on things like production and consumption. Like, Sephiroth is the ultimate, like, not only is he toxic because of the Ubermensch thing, but he's proof that, like, when you turn a person into something to be consumed, it breaks them in a fundamental way. It turns them into a consumer, you know um which is what Sephiroth does. He consumes, you know and I would argue it makes the case that you don't need to be a hero. I mean, that's sort of, yeah, we're kind of saying the same thing differently, right? That, like, it deconstructs the hero identity and the hero role, as that the ordinary people who are strong when they need to be strong, regardless of the context that led up to it, save the world. They're the things that change stuff, you know. The under the high wind scene is the real climax. Oh boy. Okay, before I take us over to Blitz, uh, which is Blitz live yet? Blitz, are you live? I'm looking on my phone because oh, he is live. Yeah, he's live. So okay, before I take us over to Blitz, I will say, um, under the high wind is gonna be is gonna be one of those scenes. Um, all right. Bold of you guys to assume the under the high wind scene appearing will solve any debates. Okay, so look again. I'm just going to briefly touch into the shipping thing. I don't think under the high wind will, even if it's super explicit one way or the other, or even if it's a scene that is completely altered based on player choice. Uh, the conversation will last forever, and there's nothing that can be done about that. I do think, however, that scene, um, that scene will be the real litmus test for how much that question, you know, the shipping question, really impacts overall player reception. Because that scene can come out wrong, and it will have some of the people that are most present in the fandom the most disappointed. And it is the scene more than the live stream sequence, more than anything else, more than the ending. Any kind of like Sora and Sora and like Marty McFly could walk into frame at the end of the Sephiroth fight, and it would generate less of a crash out than a under the high wind scene that didn't meet certain fan expectations, you know. um and so we'll find out, like, will that percentage of the fandom, are they really representative? It'll be an interesting litmus test to see. um uh I have a feeling that what they will do, this, I think it's the scene that has the least likely chance of um being satisfactory for the people that it's important to. I just hate to say that. And you want them to crash out. I get that. I do. Like, there's times I want them to crash out, but I don't. Today. Today, I don't. Today, I'm trying to, see them as fans, that this is the way that they've appreciated art. But I do also just recognize it's a problem. It's really hard. It's really hard. And, um, I don't know a good way. Imagine they changed it for player choice and it's just Cloud and Barrett having a beer under the high wind. Um, I mean, like, that would be, yeah. I will say this, okay. Um, I would, a group of us had review codes early, right? And we could only really talk to each other about it for a little bit, like right after the game released, and we all knew that we had that game. Not before. We would never tell anybody before, right? But we knew we were like the only people that had beaten it. And there's a period of time, and I'm talking to people, and um, the guy that had the best time, um, just he skipped all the side content. He had no context for how the resolution scene would go on, and he got the bro date with Vincent and Sid and all them, and he loved it. He probably had the most positive experience in the Gold Saucer. So, like, we joke, but there is genuinely an audience that'd be like, hell yeah, to just like Beer Under the High Wind with Barrett. Like honestly, I want to see that. That sounds great, you know. Um, but I also want to see all of them, you know, if there's multiple. I don't know. The moment you make Under the High Wind optional, um, people will get big mad, you know. And you know what? I don't know if I want it to change either. I haven't really decided. Um, I haven't really decided. What I like about that segment of the game though is it's about everybody kind of taking their own time, you know, like, oh, this is it. You know, this is where we all go do our stuff. And what I like about that is it feels classic JRPG, right? Peach Booty Poppin'. I know Gene Park got the date. Gene Park is in fact the person I'm talking about. Yeah. He skipped everything but the main story. Yeah, he just bum rushed the story. You know what it was? Is he was trying he like so, you know, everybody, he wanted to see the ending before anyone else. And so he just hauled ass to the ending. And you know what? I don't blame him. Like that's intense pressure. I think the other big determining factor is going to be Sid. A lot of people really wanted to see old Sid. Yeah, Sid's a big one. Um I mean, Sid's a big one for the artistically conservative too, though. Like they see him as kind of like a hero for their cause. So I think people that are, and we talked about this a little earlier on the on the stream, but I think people that are like kind of bought into um what the remake project is aren't as attached to Sid. Um, you know, with some exception, with some notable exception. Um, you know, but I actually think that uh I think so. You know, you'll hear a lot of people like defend Sid and say, no, you know, the localization really painted him in this certain way. Um, but I actually think that the representation in the final game will split the difference, and that it's pulling the wool over our eyes a little bit. Like he's gonna finally drop his facade. And it sounds like it's in the latter half of the game, right? That we finally get to Rocket Town. We probably only go there once, and for story reasons, that actually makes more sense to me. Um, and so we only go there once, and that's where we see the real Sid. And he might get in a huge fight with Shara, and then go out and finally like go go smoke a cigarette. Um, and right now he's just being a Southern gentleman. I do have a feeling they're gonna do that. Um, but I also, you know, yeah, I don't necessarily like Sid isn't a deal breaker for me. He never has been. Um, but I'll certainly be honest. Like if you know they kind of blow his character arc, I'll be like, yeah, they blew it. Like they blew the dying scene. They blew the dying scene. You're not going to talk me out of that. Like there are elements of the scene that are really good, and there are elements of the relationship that are really good. And John Eric Bentley's acting is so good, and there's not a moment that Barrett is on screen that Barrett isn't killing it. But the way that it was depicted was just inferior, and you know I 100% will stand by that. If they do the same with Sid, I'm going to 100% stand by that too. I don't mind if Sid is a little more polite. I think we get plenty of his angry yelling moments. Yeah, if we get the angry yelling moments, I think it'll actually make his polite moments feel more authentically Southern, right? Like, you know, I really do. I think that like that hospitality thing. Yeah, I wonder if we'll get anything new of Sid's story in Icicle and considering he knew of Falna. Yeah. I also just I really would be surprised if we see Icicle in on our first like in the first few hours of the game. I have a feeling it kind of skips around a little bit and we either go back to Icicle in for some other reason. We know snowboarding's a thing, but I think the Vincent Lucrezia scenes are going to need to be great too. Yeah. My biggest fear is that they kind of like lock that behind some DLC. But at the same time I feel like they're not, because I think they're going to spend a lot of time on Vincent and Sid because they're new playable characters. At the expense of maybe some other characters we want to see more of. Um, I actually really liked the dying scene and respect other opinions, but I thought it was portrayed really well. They made him sympathetic without being so crazy. I lose my empathy for him like OG. With crazy, I lose my empathy for him like OG. And again, like, I think there are things that it does right, um, and balances that it strike. Um, but it's other stuff too, like the visuals too, and also kind of the softballing of the yeah, rating stuff. And that's something we haven't talked about either yet. I wonder what this one's going to be rated. Snowfields, Icicle Inn, Get Fits, Glacier Cave, Vincent Dungeon, Whirlwind, Maze, Sid's Area, and then onward from there. Ghost of Corral. You think we get Fits that early? It's interesting. We only see Fits when we have Cloud back in the party. M at most? Is there something beyond M? AO? Dude, yeah. Yeah, no, but M is a big deal. Like, M is a big deal. Can you imagine? They just they just go to AO. I bet they'll aim for T. I think we might be surprised. I think this one might be M, which is wild, but yeah. I believe Chadley gives you fits. Is that a double entendre? Like, you get fits? They said we get fits at the beginning though. They said pretty early. We see Barrett's and Kate Sith's and Fitz in what I assume is Gas Lab. I mean, I sort of assume the same, which is why I think we might skip Icicle Inn and Gas Lab in the beginning. The thing, like, if it's M, people really excited for Under the High Wind will be happy. Maybe, but I don't even think that would be where it would come up. I think so. You know what I think? Um, they'll have difficulty with the M thing. Um, One, smoking, but that was already a thing. Two, the um the Junon scene with Tifa escaping the death. Believe it or not, there's a lot about being restrained and stuff like that in that specific way that adultifies ratings. Yeah, they mentioned skins for weapons too. I hope there's a lot of weapon skins, and also it was important too that they specified the outfits and skit and fits are separate things. To be clear, I stepped away because of the fan base. Games didn't really have anything to do with it. Oh, Soldier, yeah. Well, hey, I have great news for you. The fan base completely healed while you're gone. We never have any arguments anymore. We're so good. So come back, okay? It'll be fine. It'll totally be fine. Yeah, and I see I hear people about the pacing stuff too, especially with the dying scene. Right after Earth dies, I don't want. Yeah. Okay, listen. I think it's time. It's time to go over to. Okay, I'm gonna get this set up here. Okay. So I want to do something to end the stream here that I haven't done yet with YouTube. And so I'm like doing it right now. So let me get that set up while you guys figure out final questions. And then I'll get my finger on the button of how to like do it. YouTube Studio. Okay. Got my finger on the button. Okay. So, okay, let's go back to chat for just a little bit. Playable Proud Claude versus Diamond Weapon. Okay. Hamaguchi said Chadley has a high-tech room in the airship in the early interview right after the SGF reveal. Yeah. Um and it sounds like you don't get the I mean, it sounds like that. So I think the high-tech room might be it is. It could also be that that room, the Fitz room is in gas area. I think I'd be a little surprised if Fitz appeared before like the kind of prologue-ish thing, right? I could be wrong, but um like I mean like for instance, we see the HPs in like the 2000s during the Genova fight. So that feels kind of like the tutorial section almost, you know? And like the first chapter of Remake almost, and Rebirth even. Um where we get to see all that stuff, but they're not going to super overload us with new functions until we're a little bit into it. Like I have a feeling that we're not going to see Fitz until we get Cloud back. I've wondered if the stat numbers we've seen are placeholders. They could be misdirects. Like they could be pulling they could be pulling a Naughty Dog and putting false details. You actually re-downloaded Remake and Rebirth to replay them? They're terrible. Why? Just play the OG. No, I'm kidding. No, they're good. I mean, they're fun. Um, you're gonna like them. I can tell this time it's gonna be different. Sephiroth is gonna remake your experience of these games, so this time it'll be good. Like maybe stats aren't aligned with how far in the game it is, but although I remember saying we'd get all the outfits fairly early, certainly after the prologue, though I agree. Yeah, so I don't know, but it just there's a game design thing where you don't try and overload, um, you know, overload with mechanics. Mechanics keep on coming. Didn't they say once Highwind is available, it is when Fitz is going to be introduced? Maybe. I've read everything. And I I'm not remembering that detail, but I had a recent near fatal illness and perhaps my retention isn't what it used to be. Tuete. How much of the world will be explorable? The areas of rebirth are a small fraction. I think the whole world will be explorable, but there will be natural gates um and that some of the gates will have to do with the weapons. The weapons will prevent you from entering some areas. Especially some of the old areas. It feels like there's going to be natural gates in play that you have to get past before you can go back to areas and stuff like that. You'll be able to hit touches from it, but I'm sure there's some progression to get deeper into each area. And that is actually from an interview. Like for instance, why can't you go back to Gongaga? And they say there's a weapon in the middle. Um, what would you say is the most prevalent after effect of OG 7 on players? My experience was around 2006, but what I had heard the most was that the Terror of Sephiroth as this badass villain makes me wonder what the real big post play feelings will be. Um, that's wild. Yeah. Um, that's it. Yeah, that's an interesting question. In '97, like Sephiroth and the One Winged Angel thing was really cool, and having that fight. But um, I the in '97, a lot of the discourse I had was that people were mad at me for liking it because they thought that Final Fantasy VII was a soulless incarnation of the highly superior Final Fantasy VI. And then until Final Fantasy X came out, every Final Fantasy was compared to Final Fantasy VII, and everybody didn't like them. Like people were like, oh man, I hate Cloud. Um, you know, and then a billion people would kill him. Like, and then they'd be dead forever. Uh, and really had a lot to do with like generations. Like what was the first one you played, and between 7, 8, and 9, and then there was a lot of outfighting about that. But then once it got into that, like the legacy of 7 was so far beyond 8 and 9. Despite the fact that I really loved 9 a lot, and 8's okay. 8 was pretty good. Um, but the legacy of 7 so far eclipsed it that you know everybody was talking about how we hit this new generation with the PS3, and there was everybody wanted a remake of Final Fantasy 7 on PS3, and during the PS2 era, Final Fantasy 10 came out. Final Fantasy 10 was fantastic, but Kingdom Hearts came out, and there was like adult Cloud, and you know, a lot of and adult Sephiroth, and that really changed. Like that was kind of like the narrative around it. You know, was like, oh, these two cool Kingdom Hearts characters, what are they all about? You know, and then Advent Children, and so yeah, I mean, like the foil of Cloud and Sephiroth is like kind of a thing that a lot of people that casually dip their toes into the space of Final Fantasy VII take away from Final Fantasy VII, like to the point where, you know, if you're trying to, like, let's say you're an outsider, you're not Final Fantasy, you're not Square Enix, and you want to sell Final Fantasy, a Final Fantasy collaboration, you know, to a bunch of casual people, what do you show? And I'll tell you what you show is you put Cloud on one building of the Hotel Figueroa and Sephiroth on the other in downtown LA during the riots. And then people who play Magic are like, wow, this Cloud and Sephiroth game is really cool, you know? So yeah. Okay. So I've talked enough. You guys have been great. Next time I will have my guests. And again, apologies for that happening. You know, but things happen and it's okay. And I think we had a good time and a good discussion anyways. And on this one, since it's just been me talking to you guys, if you come through and you watch the uploaded live stream later and you ask questions in comments, I'll do a better job at answering them. And we'll go from there. So with that, I am going to redirect over to Blitz. And stop the stream. But I love you guys. And yes, will the discussion be rescheduled to another date with those creators? Some variant of it. All of those creators will be on my channel at some point. If not together, then apart. I think. So, yeah. Barring catastrophe. Anyways, I love you guys. You guys are the best. Thanks for being here. Soldier's going to be on. He's coming. We're dusting him off. He's coming out of retirement. He's going to be on.